Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles and on this episode we're doing Revolutionaries. The topic for this Revolutionaries, the superstar Billy Graham. Now if you haven't seen any of my Revolutionaries videos before, this is basically where we take a wrestler in the history of the sport and explain why they're so revolutionary, why they're so important, and what makes them one of the most important people in the history of the sport. How they changed the game, how they left their imprint on it and made it better. For this one, we're talking about the superstar Billy Graham, and you probably heard most of this already. This is going to be one of the ones that I know has been talked about. It's been talked about on his DVD release by WWE. Several wrestlers have talked about it in shoot interviews and just regular interviews. Several podcasts have talked about this. But I do want to bring it up because he is such a huge part of the fabric of pro wrestling and changing the fabric of pro wrestling that I can't ignore it. I can't just say, well, it's been covered, so I'm not going to cover it. And the reasons I want to bring up that he's revolutionary, usually I have some bullet points here. This isn't a deep dive into his career. This is more how he changed the game. For me, the first reason, the flamboyant bodybuilder look. If you go back to the days before the superstar, there were big wrestlers, there were strong wrestlers, there were guys like the Crusher, Dick the Bruiser, Bruno Sammartino. These guys were big, huge, strong men. You add in guys like Luthez, who had an amazing physique for his time, guys like Dick Hutton, guys like Gorilla Monsoon. All these guys were powerhouses. They had something there. But when we get into the superstar, we start seeing more of that bodybuilder look, more of that Arnold Schwarzenegger look. What would be commonplace in the 80s and 90s, he revolutionized in the 70s. And you could just look at his style and look at pictures of him. It may not resonate to you now because you're seeing it after the fact, and even to me, it took a while for it to really resonate. But when you think about the wrestlers that pretty much copied his style, whether that be Jesse the Body Ventura, Triple H, Scott Steiner. Scott Steiner openly said that he used the superstar Billy Graham template for his Big Papa Pump persona. Then you look at the guy that is blatantly, obviously, a photocopy of him, and that is Hulk Hogan. And this isn't talking bad about Hulk Hogan, I'm not saying it at all. Wrestlers through history have taken what people have done before them and grew on it and expanded it, whether it be Hulk Hogan taking Billy Graham's style and running with it, or Chris Benoit and Davey Richards taking the Dynamite Kid style. It's all relevant. All wrestlers build on what's come before. So this isn't a knock on any of the wrestlers that were heavily influenced by him. But you don't get Hulkamania if you don't have the superstar. The superstar is a template for Hulkamania. He talked about how big his arms were. He wore the flamboyant gear. Even when you get into the Hollywood era of Hulk Hogan, when he started wearing the boas, guess who did that first? Billy Graham. The tie-dye, the different looks to him, the outrageous glasses. Even if you look at his promos and the Hulk Hogan promos early on, and even as he became Hulk Hogan, the super ultra babyface, you'll see the similarities going back to Billy Graham. And Billy Graham was that guy. He's the guy that made it, like it or love it or hate it, most of us, myself included, and based on the demographics that watch my videos that I can look at, most of you are around my age, so I'd be willing to guarantee that most of us came into wrestling when the big physiques were one of the main things, where you had guys like the Ultimate Warrior, the Road Warriors, Hulk Hogan, Paul Orndorff, Rick Rude. Up and down the card, you had guys that looked like they were chiseled out of granite. They looked like Greek gods. Hercules Hernandez, there you go, Hercules, a god. And that goes back to superstar. He was the first guy to really be successful with that template. And he laid the groundwork for all those guys. Like I said, you've heard Triple H mention that he was highly influenced by him. You heard Scott Steiner say it. We could look at Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan's even said it, I think. Jesse Ventura said it. I mean, look at Ventura and you look at that superstar, and basically, it's the same character. It's like when Nature Boy Buddy Landel and Nature Boy Ric Flair were wrestling at the same time. For that, changing the look look of pro wrestling. That's my number one reason why he's a revolutionary. Now, my second reason, he was the first guy to really be a cool heel. Now, some might argue Gorgeous George was a cool heel before him, but from everything I've read and every book that I've read of the era of Gorgeous George's time, he wasn't what we would call a cool heel. And what I mean by that is when you think of someone like the NWO, or you think of someone like The Rock, or even the Four Horsemen at the height of their fame, when there are just as many fans in the crowd that wanted to cheer the heel as wanted to cheer the face. And you go back to the time of Superstar, he's really the first person to get that kind of reaction. Had there been heels that turned face before? Yes. But he was getting the reaction without turning face. He was still a heel, and he was still getting cheered. I don't know how much of the stuff that's on the network, or Peacock as it is now, is edited, but if you watch some of those videos, say of him versus like Dusty Rhodes, or him versus Bruno Sammartino, or Pedro Morales, or Bob Backlund, go back and watch and hear, unless it's something like New York where they just go crazy for Bruno, he's getting a good amount of cheer to him. He's getting a good amount of response to what he's doing. And it's because he was so different. He was so much of a change from what the old guard was. Whereas in the 60s and 70s and even before that, a wrestler would look like your neighborhood tough guy that, you don't want to get in a bar fight with. But Superstar looked like a highly chiseled athlete, a little bit different. That's not to say that he wasn't as tough as some of the other guys, or some of the other guys weren't as impressive looking as he was, just in different ways. It was just a change. And the fans gravitated to that. He looked different. He talked different. One of the things that I'm not even going to bring up here is his promo style, which, depending on who you listen to or where you listen to, Ric Flair, Dusty Rhodes, other people took right from that. There's promos that he said that I've heard Dusty say, Too Sweet to Be Sour, The Tower of Power. If you go back chronologically, and I might be wrong, there may not just be video of Rhodes saying it before then, but the earliest videos I've heard those words specifically were from the Superstar. And that's what made him cool. He was like The Rock of his generation. He was a great orator. He was a great wrestler. He was a showman. He was someone that showed off, and that really set the groundwork for what would be the next generation of wrestlers. The generation, like I said earlier, that most of the people watching this video grew up watching, whether that be Hogan, Patera, Rick Rude, Macho Man Randy Savage. Look at all of them, and look at them in comparison to a 70s version of Superstar Billy Graham, and see how similar they are. See how much of his style was used to build what would become the WWF, what would happen in Jim Crockett to an extent. Even World Class with Kerry Von Erich had a very bodybuilder look to him. His style spread like wildfire. You could argue it's the thing that ignited the WWF into being a global company. I would say without him, Hulk Hogan's nowhere near as popular as Hulk Hogan got. And again, no knock on Hulk Hogan, just you had a guy to set the plate for you. You had a template to follow. For these two reasons, I think Superstar Billy Graham is definitely one of the most revolutionary wrestlers in wrestling. He's one of the guys that has changed the game, one of the guys that I think made it better. One of the reasons, like I said, that I started watching wrestling was watching the guys that emulated him. And without even knowing it, he affected my enjoyment of entertainment. Because, as you can see, I'm a guy that makes a wrestling YouTube channel in my late 40s. I've watched 40 years of wrestling, more than 40 years now, and it all stems from the style created by the Superstar. So for that, you have to consider the guy a revolutionary. He has to be put into that list. But let me know what you think. What do you think makes Superstar Billy Graham revolutionary? Do you think it's the tie-dye shirts? Do you think it's the promos? Do you think it's the physique? Do you think it's a little bit of everything? Do you think it's the cool heel factor? Like I said, he led the way for people like the NWO to be cool later on. Let me know in the comments. With all that being said, my name is George Coles, and you've been watching Revolutionaries.